Chapter 1. The Arena Awakens. The alien arena was nothing like anything James Lawson had ever seen. Rising in tiers that stretched beyond the limits of his vision, it was filled with creatures of every imaginable shape and size, each one more bizarre than the last. Massive holoscreens projected his image across the stadium, the lights casting harsh shadows that made him appear small against the vast, roaring crowd. He was a human and earthling stranded and outmatched in a galaxy that viewed him as little more than a curiosity, or worse, entertainment. In the alien courts, he was known as the Pet Gladiator, a designation he despised. The High Council had ordered his entry into the Galactic arena to test the limits of Earth species. They expected him to fail, and fail spectacularly. And, if he was honest, James half expected the same. His eyes darted around the open expanse of the sand-covered pit as he adjusted the simple leather armor and gripped the alien-forged weapon he had been handed. It was a strange, lightweight staff that hummed faintly, crackling with dormant energy whenever he held it just so. The guards hadn't explained its function, nor did they seem to care if he figured it out. They assumed he wouldn't survive long enough to make it matter. High above, in an opulent suite reserved for the ruling monarchs, an assembly of alien queens watched with keen interest. Resplendent in their lavish garments, they sipped from crystalline goblets, exchanging whispers and chuckles as they awaited the show. Queen Ryla of the Lunarians leaned forward, her serpentine gaze locking onto the lone figure below. "Look at him," she murmured to the others, her voice a soft purr. "A frail creature, isn't he? I give him 2 minutes." Beside her, Queen Zari of the Drakiri laughed, her talons tapping rhythmically on the edge of her seat. "You're generous, Ryla. I say 1 minute at most." Meanwhile, in the arena, James took a deep breath, trying to shake off the oppressive feeling of being judged, evaluated, and, most likely, condemned. He was a soldier back on Earth, but here, he was out of his element. Yet, he couldn't deny a faint, stubborn spark of resilience, the will to survive. He was determined to last longer than they expected, if only to spite them. A booming voice echoed through the arena, announcing the first challenge. A large gate opposite James rumbled open, and from its depths emerged a monstrous beast, covered in scales as thick as armor plating. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, and it let out a guttural roar, shaking the very ground beneath James's feet. He clenched his makeshift staff, instinctively taking a defensive stance. He'd faced hostile terrain and brutal conditions back on Earth, but this was different. This creature was designed to kill, and the fact that it was being unleashed on him as a test only deepened his resolve. The creature lunged, and James barely had time to roll out of the way. The audience erupted in cheers and laughter as he scrambled to his feet, dust and sand clinging to his sweat-drenched skin. The beast circled him, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed out his scent. "All right, big guy," he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the staff. "Let's see what this thing can do." With a burst of courage, he thrust the staff forward. A surge of energy exploded from its tip, hitting the creature square in the chest. It let out a deafening roar, stumbling back a few steps, clearly wounded but not defeated. James's heart raced. So the staff wasn't just for show, it had power, if he could figure out how to wield it properly. In the royal suite, Queen Ryla's eyebrows raised slightly. Well, perhaps our little human has some fight in him after all." Queen Zari leaned forward, her interest piqued. "He's lasted longer than I expected. Maybe he's more than just a primitive plaything." Down in the arena, James continued to dodge and strike, gradually learning the rhythm of the creature's movements. He focused on staying one step ahead, anticipating its lunges and sidestepping at the last second. The crowd's initial amusement shifted into something else, a mix of surprise and curiosity, perhaps even respect. James had started to find his rhythm, his movements becoming more fluid as he dodged and countered each of the beast's attacks. Each time he managed to land a hit with his staff, he could feel the crowd's energy shift, a ripple of interest among the spectators who had dismissed him as nothing more than a doomed curiosity. The creature reared back, its scales shimmering under the arena lights, and James seized his chance, swinging his staff and aiming for the softer tissue between its plated scales. The beast let out a pained screech as the energy from the staff tore through its side, leaving a gaping wound that oozed thick, dark blood onto the sand. James barely had time to catch his breath before the creature whipped its tail at him, and he threw himself to the ground to avoid being crushed. But as he pushed himself up, panting, he realized that the crowd's jeers had turned to murmurs of astonishment. From her high seat in the royal suite, Queen Ryla's predatory gaze sharpened. "Remarkable," she purred, her lips curving into an intrigued smile. "He's showing far more resilience than I expected." Beside her, Queen Zari's eyes glinted with newfound interest. "Indeed. Perhaps we've underestimated Earth's warriors. There's a strength there. Raw, untamed." James could sense the crowd shift, too, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The beast was injured, its movements slower, but it was far from defeated. The creature roared again, charging with fury, its maw wide open, revealing rows of jagged teeth. James gripped the staff tightly, waiting for the right moment. As it lunged, he thrust the staff forward with all his strength, aiming straight for the creature's throat. The weapon discharged a powerful burst of energy, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The beast's eyes went wide, its body shuddering as the energy pulse tore through it. Then, with a final groan, it collapsed onto the sand, still and lifeless. A hush fell over the arena. For a brief moment, James just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the massive body of the creature sprawled at his feet. Then, a roar erupted from the crowd. Cheers, applause, astonished exclamations in alien languages he couldn't understand. The very ground beneath him seemed to vibrate with the force of their reactions. In the royal suite, the queens exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. Queen Ryla leaned back, studying James with a keen, appraising look. "It seems our human has exceeded all expectations," she mused. "Perhaps there is more to him than we realize." Queen Zari chuckled softly, her gaze never leaving James. "And I wonder what else he's capable of." As the noise from the crowd continued to swell, a large holographic figure appeared above the arena, one of the High Council members overseeing the games. He addressed the crowd in a booming voice, acknowledging James's unexpected victory and declaring him fit to face the next trial. James felt a mix of relief and dread. He had survived the first fight, but he knew this was far from over. The council had expected him to die quickly, but now that he had shown his strength, they would likely test him with greater and more deadly challenges. Back in his quarters that evening, James collapsed onto the cold stone floor, exhausted but alive. His muscles ached, and bruises were already beginning to form from where he had barely dodged the creature's attacks. He closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to prepare for whatever might come next. But his brief moment of peace was interrupted by the sound of the heavy metal door sliding open. He looked up to see a tall, graceful figure step into the room. Her skin shimmered in shades of iridescent blue, and her gown, woven with silver threads, trailed behind her like liquid light. It was Queen Ryla. James scrambled to his feet, unsure how to address her. She regarded him with a cool, almost predatory smile, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't quite place. "Human," she said, her voice a melodic purr. "You've surprised us all. We expected a brief, amusing spectacle, yet here you are, still standing." James swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I didn't intend to disappoint." She laughed softly, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Disappoint? Quite the opposite. You have piqued my curiosity." She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Tell me, what drives you? Is it survival, or is there something more?" James hesitated. "Survival, I suppose, but also pride. I won't be reduced to mere entertainment, not without a fight." Queen Ryla studied him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Such spirit. I admire that." She tilted her head, her expression shifting to one of amusement. "In fact, you've impressed several of us." James blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Several? Of you?" Queen Ryla's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. "The queens. We have a wager of sorts. Each of us selected a gladiator, but none expected a human to endure. Now, you've drawn our attention, and perhaps our favor." The implications of her words settled over him like a weight. He had unknowingly become a point of interest, a contender in a game played by the galaxy's most powerful rulers. But with that interest came potential advantages and dangers. "What does that mean for me?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. Queen Ryla stepped closer, her gaze intense. "It means that you may yet have a chance to survive this ordeal, provided you continue to impress us. I might even offer you my protection, if you prove worthy." James felt a surge of resolve. He had come to this alien arena as a prisoner, but now he saw a glimmer of opportunity. If he could win over the queens, he might find a way to not only survive, but perhaps even escape this brutal world. With a nod, he met Queen Ryla's gaze, his voice filled with determination. "Then I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself." She inclined her head, a sly smile gracing her lips. "Good. I look forward to seeing what else you're capable of, human." With a final, lingering glance, she turned and left, leaving him alone once more. But James no longer felt the same sense of despair that had haunted him since his capture. He now had something to fight for, a purpose, a chance to forge his own path in this twisted game of power and survival. As the next day dawned, James entered the arena with a newfound determination. The crowd roared as he stepped forward, and he could feel the eyes of the queens watching, evaluating. He was no longer just a gladiator destined to die. He was a contender, a wild card in a game that none of them had expected him to play. The gates opposite him rumbled open, and a new creature emerged, this one even more formidable than the last. Its hide was covered in shimmering spines, and its eyes gleamed with intelligence. It moved with a fluid grace, stalking him with predatory precision. James took a steadying breath, gripping his weapon tightly. He knew that each battle would be more challenging, each creature deadlier than the last. But he also knew that he had the eyes of the galaxy's rulers upon him, and with their attention came the chance for alliances, for protection, perhaps even freedom. He raised his staff, his mind focused, his body poised. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for respect, for dignity, for the hope of a future beyond the arena's bloody sands. And as he prepared to face the next challenge, he knew that he would do whatever it took to seize that future, no matter the cost. Chapter 2. A Game of Queens. The crowd's roar echoed through the massive arena as James squared off against his next opponent. This creature was faster, more agile than the last, a sleek, panther-like beast with a long tail covered in barbed scales that lashed back and forth with deadly precision. James tightened his grip on his staff, feeling the weight of his life resting on his every move. His muscles were sore from yesterday's fight, but he couldn't afford a single misstep. Every second he survived was a second closer to proving his worth, not just to himself, but to the powerful queens who watched from above. With a sudden burst of speed, the creature lunged at him, and James barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as its tail whipped past him, striking the ground with enough force to send a spray of sand into the air. James quickly rose to his feet, his mind racing as he calculated his next move. He could sense that this beast was intelligent, that it wasn't simply attacking on instinct. It was observing him, waiting for an opening, much like a hunter with its prey. High above in the royal suite, the alien queens watched with rapt attention. Queen Ryla leaned forward, her serpentine eyes gleaming with fascination as she observed James's movements. Each of his victories had surprised her, and now her interest had turned into something else, an intense curiosity that bordered on admiration. Beside her, Queen Zari of the Drakiri kept her gaze locked on the fight, her talons tapping a rhythmic beat on the arm of her throne. "He's lasted longer than I thought," she mused, a hint of respect in her tone. "There's a raw resilience to him, a kind of determination I haven't seen in many warriors." Queen Saphira of the Aquarii, seated on Ryla's other side, nodded in agreement, her soft blue skin shimmering in the light. "Indeed, there's something compelling about him. I'd like to see just how far he can go." Back in the arena, James sidestepped another attack, thrusting his staff forward and sending a pulse of energy that struck the creature in the chest. It stumbled, letting out a guttural growl as it regrouped. James took a deep breath, his mind focused and calm. He could feel the crowd's energy shifting again, their initial amusement transforming into genuine interest. For the first time, he realized that they weren't just watching him for entertainment, they were beginning to root for him. The creature charged once more, and this time, James met its advance head-on. With a swift motion, he swung his staff, aiming for the beast's head. The impact landed perfectly, and the creature crumpled to the ground, motionless. The arena fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause and cheers. James stood there, panting, the weight of his exhaustion mingling with a sense of triumph. He had done it. He had survived yet another trial. As he walked out of the arena, the cheers echoing in his ears, he felt a strange sense of pride. He was more than just a human fighting for survival now. He was a symbol, a challenge to the expectations of those who thought him weak, and perhaps a contender for something greater. Back in his quarters, James collapsed onto the rough cot, his mind reeling from the day's events. He knew that each fight would only get harder, and that he was still very much at the mercy of the council. But for the first time, he felt that he had allies even if they were queens with their own hidden agendas. A knock echoed through the room, and James sat up, instinctively reaching for his staff. The door slid open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Queen Saphira, her delicate blue skin glistening in the low light, her gaze soft yet calculating. "James," she greeted him, her voice a melodic whisper. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." James rose to his feet, bowing slightly out of respect. "Your Majesty, I didn't expect anyone." Queen Saphira gave him a gentle smile, her eyes filled with an inscrutable expression. "You continue to surprise us all. We thought you would last only minutes, and yet here you are, defying every expectation." She stepped closer, her presence radiating a calm, almost soothing energy. "I came here to offer you a proposal." James raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "A proposal?" She nodded, her gaze steady. "The queens have been discussing you, James. You've become something of a phenomenon among us. We each see something unique in you, a strength that defies logic. And as such, we are prepared to offer you our favor, our protection." James's heart raced. Protection? In exchange for what? Queen Saphira smiled faintly, sensing his caution. "In exchange for loyalty. If you ally yourself with me, I can ensure that your time in the arena will be less brutal. And if you continue to impress us, there may even be a future for you beyond the games." He studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. He had no illusions. This was a game of power, a delicate dance of alliances and favors, where he was little more than a pawn. But a pawn with powerful allies had a better chance of surviving. "What would this loyalty entail?" he asked, his tone careful. Queen Saphira stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "It's simple, really. Continue to win, continue to prove your worth. And when the time comes, when I call upon you, answer. Do this, and I promise you'll find freedom beyond the arena's walls." James hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't trust any of the queens fully, but he couldn't deny the potential advantage this alliance offered. If he could secure her favor, it might give him the leverage he needed to escape the brutal cycle of fights. "Very well," he said, nodding. "I'll accept your offer." Saphira's smile widened, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Excellent. I knew you were a man of reason, James. I look forward to seeing what you're truly capable of." With a final nod, she turned and left, leaving James alone once more. He sat back on the cot, his mind racing with possibilities. He had forged an alliance with one of the queens, a powerful move that could very well be the key to his survival. But he knew that alliances in this world were fragile, and he couldn't afford to become complacent. Each queen had her own agenda, her own designs, and he was now a part of that intricate game where betrayal was as likely as loyalty. The next morning, James entered the arena with renewed determination. He had no illusions about the dangers he faced, but he felt a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting to secure his place in a world that had dismissed him as weak, to prove that humanity had a strength and resilience unlike any other. As the gates opened and his next opponent, a towering, multi-limbed creature with skin like steel, stepped into the arena, James took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could feel the queen's eyes on him, watching, evaluating. This time, he would give them a fight to remember. With a fierce cry, he lunged forward, his movements precise and calculated. Each strike fueled by the promise of something greater, a life beyond the arena, a future where he was more than just a gladiator. And as he fought, the crowd roared, the queens watched with bated breath, and James knew that he was no longer just a human fighting for survival. He was a force to be reckoned with, a challenger to the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The battle raged on, each clash a testament to his willpower and skill. And as he struck down his opponent with a final, decisive blow, the crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing across the arena. From high above, the queens exchanged knowing glances, their expressions filled with admiration and perhaps a touch of desire. The human gladiator had proven his worth, and now, all of them wanted a piece of his power, his spirit. As he stood amidst the chaos, bloodied but victorious, James knew that his journey was far from over. The real battle was only beginning, and he was ready to face it. Chapter 3. The Queen's Favors. Word of James's victories spread quickly across the alien world. What had begun as a spectacle, a mere human expected to entertain the crowd for a few fleeting moments, had become a phenomenon. Now, he was known as the Warrior of Earth, a gladiator who defied the odds, one who had caught the attention of the galaxy's most powerful monarchs. In the days following his last fight, James felt the shift in atmosphere. The guards and attendants, once dismissive, now treated him with wary respect. The other gladiators watched him with a mixture of admiration and envy, some eager to challenge him, others hoping to avoid him entirely. But perhaps the most profound change was in the queens themselves. Queen Saphira, who had first offered him her favor, was now joined by others, each queen vying for his allegiance in subtle, often unexpected ways. Gifts began to appear in his quarters, rare fruits from distant worlds, ornate weapons forged from alien alloys, luxurious fabrics, and even messages written in unfamiliar languages. Though he didn't fully understand the customs, James knew enough to recognize these as signs of respect, perhaps even interest. One evening, while he was training in the dim, echoing hallways near his quarters, he was approached by Queen Zari of the Drakiri. She moved with a fierce, predatory grace, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on hunger. Her scaled skin shimmered under the low lights, and her presence seemed to fill the room with a primal energy. "Warrior of Earth," she greeted him, her voice low and resonant. "You've impressed us all. But strength alone isn't enough in this world." James paused, turning to face her, cautious but respectful. "What are you suggesting, Your Majesty?" Queen Zari's lips curved into a sly smile. "I'm offering you an alliance, a true alliance, one that goes beyond mere protection. I've watched you, seen the fire in your eyes. With my guidance, you could become something far greater than a gladiator." James studied her, sensing the weight behind her words. "And in return?" Zari stepped closer, her gaze smoldering. "Loyalty, devotion. I would expect nothing less from my chosen champion. In exchange, you'd have my resources, my warriors at your side. Together, we could rule not just the arena but beyond it." The proposal was enticing, but James knew it came with a price. Zari was not one to share power easily, and her reputation as a fierce, sometimes ruthless queen preceded her. Still, the thought of wielding that kind of influence, of being more than just a pawn, was tempting. "I'll consider your offer, Your Majesty," he replied carefully. Zari's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Good. Think on it, Warrior of Earth. Greatness requires sacrifice. I'll await your answer." With a final, lingering glance, she turned and strode away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Her words echoed in his mind, a promise of power and freedom that both intrigued and unsettled him. As the days passed, other queens began to make their own moves, each offering something unique, hoping to win his loyalty. Queen Ryla, with her sharp intellect and cunning, sent him messages that spoke of strategy and wisdom, hinting at a partnership built on mutual respect. She admired his resilience, she wrote, and saw in him a warrior who could change the very dynamics of their brutal society. Meanwhile, Queen Leora of the Ziyar, a race known for their deep empathy and psychic abilities, reached out to him with a softer approach. She visited him in the quiet hours, speaking to him of peace, of a future beyond the arena, one where he could live free of bloodshed. Her voice was soothing, her touch gentle as she traced symbols of protection over his skin, promising him sanctuary if he chose her as his ally. Yet for all their offers and promises, James knew that each alliance came with strings. These queens saw him not just as a warrior, but as a valuable piece in their own game, a pawn that could tip the scales in their favor. He spent sleepless nights weighing his options, haunted by visions of his future, some filled with power, others with peace. But each vision was tainted by the price he would have to pay, the sacrifices he would be forced to make. One night, as he lay awake, contemplating his path, the door to his quarters slid open quietly. He sat up, gripping his staff, but relaxed when he saw who had entered. It was Queen Saphira, the first of the queens to reach out to him, and the one whose favor had given him a crucial edge in the arena. "Your Majesty," he said, standing to greet her. She held up a hand, a gentle smile on her face. "Please, James, there's no need for formality. I came here not as a queen but as an ally." Her words were calming, her presence a balm to his restless thoughts. She took a seat across from him, her gaze warm and sincere. "I see the conflict in your eyes. You've been receiving offers, haven't you?" James nodded, not surprised that she knew. The queens shared a bond, a silent understanding that kept them informed of each other's moves. "They each see something unique in you," Saphira continued, "something that we rarely see even among our own people. Your strength, your determination, your willingness to defy expectations, these are qualities we value deeply." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a ruler, Saphira. I'm just a man trying to survive." She reached out, placing a hand on his. "You're more than that, James. You're a symbol, a warrior who has defied the odds. And now, you have the chance to shape your destiny, to choose a path that aligns with your heart." He looked up, meeting her gaze, feeling a strange sense of comfort and trust. "I don't know what path to choose. Each alliance comes with a price, a cost that I'm not sure I'm willing to pay." Saphira's eyes softened. "Then let me offer you something different, a partnership, not a bargain. I don't seek to control you, only to guide you. Together, we could work toward a future where strength and wisdom coexist, where power is tempered with compassion." Her words resonated with him, echoing the desires he had buried deep within. He didn't want to be a pawn or a conqueror. He wanted purpose, meaning beyond the endless cycle of battles. Saphira was offering him a chance to be more than just a fighter. She was offering him a vision of peace, of unity, one that felt achingly close to the life he had once dreamed of on Earth. After a long silence, he nodded. "I'll stand by you, Saphira. If there's a way to find peace, to change this world, then I'm willing to fight for it." Her smile widened, her expression one of quiet pride. "Thank you, James. You've made a wise choice." As she rose to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at him. "Rest well, warrior of Earth. Your journey is only beginning." The following day, James entered the arena with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting for a future he believed in, a future where he could be more than a gladiator, more than a pawn in someone else's game. His opponent was a formidable creature, a hulking beast with armored skin and razor-sharp claws. But James faced it without fear, his mind focused, his movements precise. Each strike, each dodge was fueled by a determination to prove his worth, to show the queens and the entire galaxy that he was more than a spectacle. The battle was fierce, each clash echoing through the arena as the crowd watched in awe. But in the end, James emerged victorious, standing tall amidst the wreckage of his opponent, his breath ragged but his spirit unbroken. From the royal suite, Queen Saphira watched him with a smile, her heart swelling with pride. She could see the transformation in him, the strength that had been tempered by purpose and conviction. He was no longer just a human fighting for survival, he was a warrior with a cause, a man who had chosen his own path. And as the crowd roared, as the other queens exchanged glances filled with envy and admiration, Saphira knew that James was destined for greatness. Together, they would forge a new legacy, a future that would change the course of the galaxy. But their journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, battles to be won, and enemies to conquer. And as they prepared for the trials ahead, James felt a sense of hope, a spark of something greater that burned bright within him. For the first time since he had arrived in the alien arena, he felt truly alive. Chapter 4: The Final Trial. The day of the final trial had arrived, and the arena was filled with an energy unlike anything James had felt before. The crowd was electric, their excitement palpable, as if they could sense that this battle would decide more than just his fate. Whispers of James's resilience and skill had spread far beyond the arena. He was no longer merely a human fighter but a symbol, a force that had captivated queens, gladiators, and spectators alike. In the royal suite, the queens sat side by side, each bearing a different expression. Queen Saphira watched with calm anticipation, her alliance with James offering her a sense of pride and hope. Queen Zari, by contrast, radiated impatience, her fierce eyes fixed on the arena as she waited to see if he would be worthy of her more aggressive ambitions. Queen Ryla's expression was guarded, her interest mingling with a touch of suspicion. And finally, Queen Leora of the Zr observed with quiet, empathetic intensity, her fingers resting on the railing as if she could feel the tension in the air. They had each, in their own way, claimed a stake in James's journey, but only one would hold the favor of the warrior of Earth. As James entered the arena, he could feel their eyes on him, each queen silently willing him to succeed for their own reasons. But he had made his choice. His allegiance was with Saphira, the queen who had offered him not just power but purpose, a vision of unity rather than conquest. And he was determined to see it through. The gates opposite him rumbled open, revealing his final opponent, a towering creature, part machine, part beast, with metal plating fused into its flesh and a pair of massive, gleaming horns. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, unnatural light, and as it stomped forward, the ground beneath it trembled. James gripped his staff, feeling the weight of his commitment. This wasn't just a fight, it was the culmination of everything he had endured, every battle, every choice. If he could conquer this creature, he would prove not only his strength but his worth to those who held his fate in their hands. The creature charged, its horns aimed at his chest, and James sprang into action, sidestepping at the last moment and striking the beast's flank with a pulse of energy from his staff. The creature stumbled but quickly recovered, its gaze fixed on him with a new level of intensity. It was faster than anything he had faced before, each movement calculated, each attack relentless. For what felt like hours, they clashed in a brutal dance of survival, James using every ounce of his strength and skill to keep pace with the creature's assaults. Sweat dripped down his face, his muscles screaming with exhaustion, but he refused to yield. He dodged, struck, and countered, his focus honed to a razor's edge. In the royal suite, Queen Saphira leaned forward, her heart pounding as she watched him. She could see the strain in his movements, the desperation mingling with determination. He was giving everything he had, fighting not just for himself, but for the alliance they had forged, for the hope they had kindled together. At one point, the creature's claws grazed his shoulder, tearing through the leather of his armor and drawing blood. The pain was sharp, blinding, but he pushed it aside, his mind solely focused on finding an opening, a way to end the battle. And then he saw it. The creature's neck, just beneath its armored plating, was exposed for a split-second vulnerability in its otherwise impenetrable defenses. Summoning every last bit of strength, James lunged forward, aiming his staff with precision. The energy pulse struck true, hitting the creature's exposed flesh and sending a shockwave through its body. The beast let out a deafening roar, its limbs shuddering as it collapsed to the ground, defeated. A hush fell over the arena, followed by an eruption of cheers that shook the very walls. James stood amidst the chaos, panting, bloodied but victorious. He looked up to the royal suite, where the queens watched with awe and admiration, and he knew that he had proven himself in ways that transcended mere survival. As the cheers continued, Queen Saphira rose, her voice cutting through the noise. Today, we have witnessed not just a gladiator's victory, but the rise of a warrior worthy of honor. James of Earth, you have shown us the strength of your people, the resilience of your spirit. From this day forward, you shall be known not as a gladiator, but as a champion of unity. Her words resonated throughout the arena, and the other queens nodded in agreement, each recognizing the magnitude of his achievement. James felt a swell of pride and relief, a sense of belonging that he hadn't known since his capture. Queen Ryla stood as well, her gaze respectful. We welcome you as an ally, James. You have earned our trust, our favor. One by one, the queens pledged their support, their alliances solidifying around him. He was no longer just a pawn in their game, he was a key figure, a symbol of hope for a future where strength and compassion could coexist. In the days that followed, James was treated not as a prisoner but as an honored guest. He dined with the queens, learned from their advisors, and shared stories of Earth, his home, a world that now seemed so distant but remained close to his heart. Each queen offered him a place in her court, a chance to serve as her champion, her ally. But his heart belonged to Saphira, the queen who had seen him not as a tool but as a person, who had given him a vision of a future worth fighting for. One evening, as they walked through the royal gardens, Saphira turned to him, her eyes soft and full of warmth. "You've changed more than just the outcome of the arena, James. You've changed us. You've reminded us of the value of unity, of empathy." He smiled, feeling a deep connection to her that went beyond words. "You helped me see a future beyond survival. I couldn't have done this alone." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle. "Then let us walk this path together, as partners, as friends. The galaxy is vast, and there is so much we can accomplish." James nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I would be honored, Your Majesty." They stood together, watching the stars as they began to appear in the evening sky. In that moment, James knew that he had found not just a new life, but a purpose, a reason to keep fighting not out of desperation, but out of hope. The years that followed saw James rise as a leader, a champion of peace and unity across the galaxy. He traveled to distant worlds, forging alliances, mediating conflicts, and spreading the message of compassion and strength. The queens became his allies, his friends, each contributing her wisdom and support as they worked to build a more harmonious galaxy. And through it all, Saphira remained by his side, a constant source of guidance and strength. Their bond deepened, growing into a partnership that transcended titles, a friendship that weathered every challenge. Together, they proved that even in the darkest places, even in the brutal depths of the arena, hope could be found, unity could be forged, and a single human could change the course of history.